Hello, how's everyone doing tonight? My name is Jennifer Mock, and I'm the Associate Educator for Public Programs and Engagement here at the Metropolitan Museum, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Through an Artist's Eyes, John Currin on Valentin de Boulogne. Our presentation tonight is part of the museum's Met Fridays series, and I think the testament that you're all here already lets me know that really, weekends for New Yorkers start here at the Metropolitan Museum. On Friday evenings, there's always something to see and do and experience, and we're so glad that you've chosen to come here tonight. And if you're a museum member, I'd like to extend an extra special welcome to you and thank you for coming. Tonight, we have the privilege of being joined by the artist, John Currin. John Currin's ambitious paintings seduce, repel, surprise, and puzzle. His masterful technique is achieved through the scrutiny and emulation of the compositional devices, graphic rhythms, and refined surfaces of 16th and 17th century Northern European painting, while his eroticized subjects exist at odds with the popular dialogue and politics of contemporary art. With inspirations as diverse as old master portraits, pin-up, pornography, and B-movies, Currin paints ideational yet challengingly perverse images of women, from lusty nymphs and dour matrons to more ethereal feminine prototypes. Consistent throughout his oeuvre is his search for the point at which the beautiful and the grotesque are held in perfect balance. With John tonight for this conversation is Keith Christiansen, a longtime curator and now John Pope-Hennessy chairman of the Department of European Paintings at the Metropolitan Museum. Keith Christiansen is the curator of the exhibition Valentin de Boulogne, Beyond Caravaggio, and I'm pleased to share that the exhibition has been extended by a week and will now be closing on January 22nd. So we have plenty of opportunities to continue to enjoy and experience the show. I invite you now to please join me with the warmest of welcomes for John and Keith.
Thank you very, very much. I'm Keith. This is John. So we got that settled. I've never done one of these, but I'm looking forward to it because I've had the great pleasure of walking around the exhibition, but not only walking around the exhibition, but of looking at paintings with John. John is a member of the visiting committee of the Department of Paintings Conservation, and therefore we've looked at things that were standing on the easel. And he came to my mind immediately as the person I would most like to have here to talk about Valentin. Even before we had walked around together the exhibition rather rapidly, because of his marvelous piece on the Ludovico Carracci for the Artist Connection. And those of you who have not looked at this, I would really invite you and encourage you to do it. It can be found on the website. At the end of one of the visiting committee meetings, John started chatting with me about the picture, and then talking to the person who was in charge of the artist project, I said, I have a feeling I know what he's going to talk about. I hope it's what he's going to talk about, because it's such a difficult picture for most people, and it's a very religious picture, the exact sort of thing that so many visitors are put off by. And of course, what he brought to it was the artist's eye and his own reading of it. And as I watched this, I kept nodding my head and thinking, absolutely, this is what I think about this beyond its historical context. And so tonight I would like to try and shift the questions I'm used to talking about, which is the historical context of Valentin de Boulogne, and get a real John's views of them. And John, naturally, because I looked at the Artist Connection once again before the talk, to extract some of the ideas that you had there. And one of the things that I loved was that you described yourself very modestly as, I am a figurative oil painter, which is a pretty vast area. And then the second thing, and this is the part that I found absolutely fantastic, as a figurative painter, I've had to accept that I would never make a stylistically consistent work of art, which I think is true of most artists, don't you think?
Well, I think retroactively you can look back, or retrospectively you can look back and see the disjointed, the hybridness of style in historical old master paintings. But I think, especially in the context of this society and modernity and contemporary is it's impossible. You can't you have to embrace a kind of a trashy bricolage of both cultural references and actual visual style in making a painting, or you'll be paralyzed and or a joke or some sort of weird like original instrument, orchestra or something like that. Or on the other, or at the other extreme, you will for instance, I dislike art that makes a point of its exclusive contemporaneity and the use of only electronic, sort of electronic music in universities. So nobody wants to listen to it, and and by the same token, very few people want to look at art that is about its independence from historical influences and styles.
I'm wondering because the period in which Valentin works is a period in which the character of art gets so distinctly redefined. Raphael, Michelangelo were all after a kind of perfection, and I think there where you expect a stylistic consistency throughout the work, but once you begin painting from the model, and your object is to make a connection with the everyday world of people, to me, the dynamic changes so decisively, and that's where inconsistencies begin to emerge because they're part of life. No?
Yes, and also the construction of the painting then becomes the composition and the way you have things overlap, the way you construct the space has to, and this is the model that you see in the model of working that you see in Caravaggio. There's like tangencies that are very awkward. There's stuff that doesn't work, that actually looks like a mistake. Like in the very famous Caravaggio. Sorry, I'm terrible with everything. Is with the kids holding down the angels holding down the palm.
I've got that actually. I don't know if I have to go.
I forget the saint. Matthew or
Saint
something.
Matthew. Martyrdom of Saint Matthew.
The Martyrdom of Saint Matthew. Which is just a mind-blowing painting. There's a problem with on the right side, the guy that has his arms pulled around to the front. We're almost there.
We're almost there. I've brought in a lot of it. There we are. There we are.
I mean, in a slide it's a bit hard to see, but the guy with no arms, on the lower right, almost eclipsing perfectly the guy in front of him. It's something you might see in real life, but I know I would, if I'd done that whole painting somehow by some miracle, I'd made that whole thing. I would say like, no, like, I can't have that in the it would feel like a mistake, but of course it's one of the most memorable. And it also, it's such a strange way to make it about St. Matthew rather than the guy in front. And you see that all over Caravaggio, just strange things you kind of couldn't make up.
Let me take up the fact that in my estimation, one of the big problems for him was that he had decided not to do a vast to arrive at the solution through a vast sequence of drawings which aim at ironing out all of the difficulties, but instead working from models, they're built into it. And
there's not going to be like golden section diagrams and all that kind of stuff.
That's right. And in fact, I put a couple slides, a couple images that I wanted to suggest how he worked from a model.
That's fantastic.
And once you do this, the jig's up. You know exactly what he did. He had a model pose on a table, actually leaning over as if he's picking up a piece of paper. And to get the back leg up, he had to put another block in. And we know how these were done. I have a series of drawings, but I want to do another one because the thing that it strikes me here, and this is I'd be really curious about your take on, is that a complex composition like this, he had to have a way of anchoring it, and then there were other parts that he could then work. This is my own reading of. There were other parts that he could then work into it around, and the anchors are for me obviously. I think one of these is to me, the key figures are, of course, the two central ones. That's the executioner. That's Matthew. Then you have this figure. You have this figure, and this. And these are this is the key components around which it's built. And so I looked at these, and each of these is posed very distinctly, and they must have, and it's as though he had worked out their placement, put them down, and then filled in the rest of the composition around them.
Yeah.
Is this the way you would kind of read this? As him
Yes,
having-
I would, and also it by that way of describing it, and then maybe those could have been done in drawings that were then transferred onto the basically like collaged on, and then this is what always struck me about his paintings is there's a kind of a link to Flemish painting, to like Van Eyck or Van der Weyden, where there's a kind of a gravityless bulletin board arrangement of objects and figures, very, very real in their local space, but the entire space is a kind of floating bulletin board of things. And of course, Italian art was always about it is you construct the space first and then populate it like a Tintoretto. There's literally like perspective and stuff put in first.
Yeah.
And I think this was a room at first, right? They found there's a room underneath that you can kind of see. At the beginning, that he had first constructed it as a room and as a volume, and then gave up on that.
He had followed a normative process.
But I think in some ways it's almost as if you cut out. Of course, it's way more sophisticated than this, but you're right. I think there's like the figures that matter are sort of glued onto the are sort of collaged onto the canvas, and then rather than using a perspectival or I mean sometimes they use clouds and things like that, but the other figures exist to define a space, and to by their foreshortening and they are sort of the architecture of the painting.
Yeah.
And whereas in a Tiepolo, all that work would be done by clouds and stuff like that.
Just to bring everybody up to the same point on this. This is Caravaggio's first great public commission, and he did two versions. Actually, he painted over the first version. The first version, he used a conventional perspectival setting with the architecture in the background, into which you would then put the figures. And once you would do a perspective, the composition sort of makes itself as you move through. He must have realized, they've done new x-rays of this, and it's now quite clear that he carried it to a very high degree of finish, and must have realized it wasn't doing what he wanted it to do, scraps it, and he creates an entirely figural composition. And that changes the dynamics of it. And I would say that I remember many years ago, 1985, when we had the Age of Caravaggio exhibition at the Metropolitan, Frank Stella gave a lecture. And he had just spent a period at the American Academy in Rome and was completely blown away by Caravaggio. And he put it that Caravaggio builds from the canvas out. He doesn't paint as you do in a perspectival world from the canvas in. And
Yes, yeah, and that's the the famous. Sorry, I mean
Yeah,
you're referring to things saying they're famous and then not know what they are. But the Tintoretto, the one with the floor with the grid on the floor,
yes,
and
it's
there's
the
a
Saint
guy
Mark, the Saint Mark.
and a turban. And
Yes.
Yeah, and you just it literally is like, I think he even used wax figures in a diorama, and this is almost like if you had a whole bunch of finished paintings and then cut them out, glued them on, because they are incised actually in. He
That's right.
scratches the rough silhouette in, and then I think he constructs objects to justify where those figures are.
Let me just do this because I'm thinking, yes, that was that. We did that. This is my thing of placing the figure. There's the incisions on this head. This is this great, and you can see in this painting of the conversion of St. Paul, this is the first version that was then rejected, and he did a second version, or at least that is now in the chapel. It's basically a horse, two men, and then the third man lying down. This is the way he incises
There are the incised lines.
That's the nose, right?
That's
Yeah.
the nose, the cheek. Here's the bridge of the brow for the eyes. And then once he gets the figure posed, he also does a brush drawing for the placement of the legs as he works along. So it's very much a process. And this is one of the other things that has fascinated me about the Caravaggesque painting. It's invented. It seems to me there's a greater leeway to invent as you move along. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, I think you have to because there's no ideal, because you can't make anything up. Like, you're not really allowed to make anything up. So at least by that, so you kind of have to Frankenstein it together. You can't just. I don't think movies about Caravaggio or these kind of painters or Artemisia or whatever. They always show the complete scene as a setup, which I think is impossible and never happened.
Those of you who've gone to the exhibition know that this is one of the leitmotifs of it, and this is a painting that I included despite the fact, or actually because it's in such a compromised state of condition that it's a palimpsest of approach. And here is a infrared reflectogram where you can actually see him painting in the lines that place the figures. And here, maybe that's, I think it might be clearer in this. And this, in this particular image, I really was quite keen on this because one of the things that's interested me is what you do if you want to work from models, but you want a quality of movement, a quality of continuity, a quality of unity, some kind of unity to the painting. And there has to be some way that you can initially place the elements that you're then going to pose.
Well, it's also in some ways, it's kind of an adaptation of mannerism where there's impossible twisting, and I imagine within figures there is a collaging of different poses within one figure. Like so I think in many cases one figure did not, and you quickly find this out when you paint. If you try to get somebody to, you can't see the leg. You have to do a kind of Picasso, like see the back and the front at the same time thing, and actually that's true of the allegory of Italy on the lower right hand figure, that you really have to, even within a figure, collage different observed poses.
Can we look at the allegory of Italy?
Yeah, hell,
Great,
yeah.
great. So I'm going to back up. I think it's about 10 back.
I mean, you save it for last in the show, but
I know. Well, hold on. There we are. Oh wait, just to skip this. This is the picture that John spoke about, and in this particular case, we have this is by Ludovico Carracci, and the Carracci Academy. Ludovico and his two cousins, Annibale and Agostino, set about programmatically to reintroduce nature or studies from life into painting. And in this particular case, we have a drawing that you can see it's taken from a different angle, but it's the exact pose of the Christ, and you will see of the dead Christ, and you will see that in fact the boxes have been used and so forth, covered with a sheet to achieve the pose that he wanted. And we have a whole series of drawings that show this intent to view figures in extreme foreshortening and so forth to achieve the mastery. And then I just put this up because this to me is the comment you made about the lack of consistency, the awkwardness, and so forth. I find this in this Dead Christ at Stuttgart to be one of the most astonishing things.
yeah, I actually ripped that painting off.
Did you?
For a nude
Is that
I made.
true?
Yeah. Like exactly. So I had the model pose. Actually, she said it was one of the most painful things she'd ever done. It just somehow lying flat with a slight bend in your back is one of the worst things you can do.
Yeah,
but
this is this extraordinary thing because he has the body curve over with the head, and it sort of collapses the space at the same time for a devotional affect, which is this. You have all the elements, the wounds of the hand, the wounds of the feet, the wound of the side, and the head, so that you get this emotive force.
and I think the amazing thing is that even within an extreme, you return by way of the arm and the hand back. It's a circle.
It's a remarkable invention.
Very different. Very different from the famous Mantegna. the Mantegna. There's a kind of finality to his death, you know, in terms of the. I mean, this is my kind of. Yeah. But just like the way you enter the space of the painting, never to emerge again. Kind of, it's almost like entering death or something. You know, like you. There's no relief. There's an interesting circularity and kind of, you know, weirdly living, recirculating aspect to it that I think is even slightly ironic in the context of it being a dead Christ, or for that matter, maybe it evokes the resurrection or something.
Well, also, in bringing up the Mantegna, which I don't have an image of, to me that is there is a certain intellectual detachment from the image that's not present in this, this actually gives a presence to suffering and to the actual the imagined presence of the figure that's been painted in a way that the Mantegna doesn't.
And one thing I want to mention with both Caravaggio and both that's the Nibale, but also Ludovico and then also weirdly Caravaggio, to a lesser extent Valentin, is the lack of realism in the drapery often, like a kind of a sing-songy nature to the drapery that I've always found odd in Caravaggio, and I think it has to do with it's almost explicitly not observed.
That's right.
From life.
Don't you? But isn't that one of the?
It's kind of painted on.
But isn't that one of the means by which he sometimes holds the parts of the composition together, or suggests a movement that otherwise would not be there, etc.
Yeah, there are marks painted on the canvas, and there's an almost willful rejection of like setting up the drapery. I mean, of course, there's famous examples of the big red drape in the dead Madonna, but I'm talking about just like generally white draperies, even on something as closely observed as the Bacchus or something. There'll be a kind of just a bunch of white and gray lines, and you see that as well actually in you know, the drapery is actually probably not even observed. It's probably just kind of painted
over. So this is the Allegory of Italy. It was one of a key painting for Valentin de Boulogne. It was a major commission from one of the greatest patrons in Rome, Cardinal Francesco Barberini, the nephew of Pope Urban VIII, and it was painted to decorate his private quarters in the Cancelleria. And the success of it led directly to him getting the commission for an altarpiece in St. Peter's, which was the most prestigious commission you could get. The two could not be more different, in my way of thinking, the two commissions. And this one gave, I think, being a private commission, gave him a completely different character. And I wanted to something else that you said that I think is absolutely germane for me here. The artist sets up rules and then contradicts them, and exists in a paradoxical space of real and unreal. And when I listened to this the other day, this is the picture that came to my mind about it, something that exists in a space that's both real and unreal.
Yes, and it's also the remarkable kind of like cubist echo especially in the lower half of the painting, of kind of folded paper, you know, very, very real forms that are then kind of folded and create a surprisingly low relief. You know, something so real to be so flat is shocking. I mean, the weird thing about the painting is that it strikes me when I saw it is like a perfect reproduction of an old master painting using like naked, like Sean Connery or something, and you know, I mean, just obviously the chest hair is, but not just from the point of view of, like, you know, often see a dark chest hair in old master paintings, but
Here we are.
You see what I mean? They're usually much more like sort of Chelsea, you know, boys, but that guy is a. I mean, I guess there's you know, it's also, he's very compelling in that weird
silver and black in his head. It shows up more in other paintings, but
By the way, yes, this is the model who recurs in at least 5 other paintings in the exhibition. So it was, and I keep thinking, a number of the people who bought his pictures, and this must happen with you as well, knew it was the same model, and that the recognition of the model gave it a different feel from simply an allegorical representation.
Yeah, it's his music, I think, and you know, he has this like incredible, you know, sort of a combination of father-like, godlike authority, and then also being a kind of a sex object. You know, it's pretty weird, and
you know, very different from these kind of workout guys that you would see in a. You could see that in a. You can imagine that in you know. Actually, really, even like Tom of Finland or Mapplethorpe or something. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know, and you know, it's just a startling erotic moment. The hairy chest guy.
Yes, yeah. Well, once you do work from the model, you've introduced a sensual element that is.
Well, it's kind of what you were saying before,
that is intentionally.
and it violates the stylistic
Yes.
tropes that come with a big, powerful, naked man.
Yeah, I want to. You know, this was something I just. This is a typical art. You can see where I come from. This is a typical art historical comparison, but it's fantastic to me. This is the Valentin de Boulogne. The image on the right is what you might not expect, and I'm not sure that you've seen this. It's this picture in the Farnese collection in Naples at Capo di Monte, and it's by Annibale Carracci very early, and it's him painting directly from the model, and it gives you this is the same artist who painted the frescoed scenes where you have the clean-shaven, classicizing, built-up person, and it's a very different kind of thing.
a real penis and you know, sorry, but you know,
There it is. And
hair and you know, you're not used to seeing sexual power in a man conveyed by
like testosterone in the form of the hair, rather than the rhythm of muscles.
than an echo of Greek sculpture, you know, of like hairless white marble Greek sculpture.
So I want to just go back on these pictures because yes. Well, this is your Caravaggio Valentin comparison. Each one taking a young guy, posing him as a Saint John the Baptist, and very distinctly different. And I think one with a much more erotic undertone, not so much. Not even
Which one do you?
Well, you know, in a curious way, I think it's the Valentin, which is this very young guy with this incredibly, very affecting, very underdeveloped upper chest.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I purposely did not. I wonder if I have. Yes. Now there's a very. This was meant for the erotic comments about the naked.
Yeah.
And then I remember that this was.
That's a great juxtaposition, actually. I mean, it's all, you know, what a 5-year-old boy with a 20-year-old's body, and you know, a 20-year-old man's body, like depilated, you know, and you know, and this is like you know, a teamster, you know, like as you know, in the same role. They're both so inappropriate, you know. I mean, that's the incredible place that the supposedly kind of sober realist style leads you to. They're not ridiculous, but crazy outcomes like these.
Now, the interesting historical fact of the painting on the right, which is Love Triumphant, Amor Vincit Omnia, a saucy kid triumphant over all of the attributes of worldly achievement, is that it was painted for, again, one of the leading connoisseur collectors of Rome, Vincenzo Giustiniani, who owned 13 pictures by Caravaggio. But even more interesting, perhaps, is that in 1650, when a British tourist in Rome was being shown the collection, taken to the collection, we learned that it was kept behind a green curtain. The green curtain was removed because it was said the room in which it was hung had marvelous Renaissance masterpieces, but it was seen that this did something different, and the surprise value of something done from life with this kid and so forth was overwhelming. But the British tourist was told who the model was, that it was the 12-year-old Cecco de Caravaggio who was Caravaggio's lover. And I love this because of the fact that this had survived the picture, was passed down much in the way that tourists tell stories about paintings, but it suggests to me that the story was an important component of looking at the picture or explaining something about the picture. That seemed to be present, and that seemed to require some sort of explanation beyond its allegorical significance.
Yeah, because it's kind of a it's impossible as an allegory, actually, because
It's impossible as an allegory because it's constantly defeating. Yeah, well, on the other hand, should mention this is I always thought my parents had Caravaggio had reproductions from Alinari. You know, they used to make these things where they'd look like real paintings you could hang on your wall.
Yeah.
My parents had got them on their honeymoon or something, and there was Gerard Honthorst. They were all Caravaggios, and I think there was I think there was a book we had that had that. And as a little kid, I thought they were photographs. I thought they were real, and that they were not, like, they never seemed like they were communicating any meaning, any learned meaning. They just seemed like crazy looking pictures. And I think that's part of, like, they don't function as allegories in the same way a lyrical Renaissance, Correggio or something,
That's right.
does that.
Yeah. Well, that's why.
Or for that matter, a Rococo painting would.
This is an allegory. To me, for me, this is my experience of this picture, that it undercuts the very premise of an allegory.
Yeah.
Like
There's no transformation of the. There's no. They keep staying what they were. They keep staying like the guy that was picked to sit there.
Yeah.
But again, seems like in a way that's a mundane point to make. But I think that's also what makes then the shallow space and the in some ways the failure of the deep space also become important. And actually that is becomes the allegory is carried a little bit more abstractly in the face of this unrelenting realism.
Wait, I hope that there was a picture that it may not be here. Let me just go one more. Just indulge me for a minute. No, I know where I am there. No, we'll skip that. I have a marvelous image somewhere in the 97 pictures that I took down to be sure I have to have something that you wanted, one of the things you might want to discuss, of Brigitte Bardot as Marianne, posing as Marianne for a magazine, juxtaposed with the young girl who was posing as allegory of Italy. And it seemed to be that this brings up the whole play between sort of the popular, the allegorical, the present, something that means something else. I don't know. I wondered if this was something that was a thought that was on your mind as you walked through Valentin.
Well, there is a different. I would say in that painting, for instance, the way the women show up when they do. There's a static aspect to the women that's I think different than it's not extreme, but there's a kind of a unrealism in the women that isn't there with the men, and which actually kind of appeals to me, as an idea. It's like men have to sort of muck around in the dirt, and then the woman can be a sort of floating celestial icon.
So then I wanted to.
But I think that's true even of their facial features.
I wanted to go all the way back to the first image that I have. So just let's just do this, because this seems to be such another juxtaposition of Valentin and Caravaggio. And I'm just curious if you had any response about the character of these two.
Well, one thing I was hoping I wouldn't
I'm trying not to only talk about Caravaggio, and I'm sure that's like Valentin's like oh geez, they're still
Exactly.
talking about it. But I can't,
I'm absolutely certain you're right.
it's like
It's constantly battling this
like,
ghost.
it was Rowan and Martin, not just Martin. The one thing about Caravaggio that over the years as I look at it is there's so much made of his supposed homosexuality but I've always found that the women's faces I find it impossible to imagine him not having some sexual understanding of women and sexual relationships with women, because I just find the women's faces to be so moving in perhaps this isn't the best example, but it's as good as any.
Well, it's her action that's
it's not exactly a dream-like a romantic encounter, but just the understanding, the friendship and the understanding and the feeling of woman's pain and feeling of motherhood, the feeling of in the rest on the flight to Egypt, just the tiredness of a mother with a newborn, just that very specific weariness.
I hadn't actually thought of tiredness, but that's absolutely true in that picture.
And then next to it, in the same museum, in the Pamphili, is the
Magdalene,
Magdalene, which in that context always struck me as a woman who's had a miscarriage, who's lost a baby, or who never got to have a baby, and the poses are identical. One's cradling a baby with exhaustion. One is I think mourning a loss.
It's so interesting because, of course, we have the response of Boulogne, who was a classical critic in the 17th century, and he described her simply as a woman drying her hair, which has always struck me as he's attempting to deny its the emotional impact that it has when you look at it.
But it's kind of brilliant too, because it's actually you can look at it almost as a genre painting, as a Chardin or something like that.
Oh, this of course is the altarpiece that he oh, there we are. That's what I had wanted. This is a series that I had wanted to put up, both because it suggests the idealization, the pose of the figure in the Valentin based on the famous Capitoline image of a river god, and the Valentin is the river god Tiber. Below we have a print, a 16th century print by Marc Antonio Raimondi based on a drawing by Raphael. It's a Raphael design. And the figures in the lower right were translated by Manet into the Déjeuner sur l'herbe. You'll see that the poses are virtually identical. It's Monet.
And you should also mention, one of the funniest things is that the God figure is the woman like washing her leg.
That's right.
He also kind of included that.
Yeah, but in my own imagination of the place of Valentin in French painting, he is sort of playing with the classical tradition, unveiling it, using models in somewhat the same way that Manet does, where he uses a compositional structure that he's inherited, and then unmasks it or undoes it or destroys it by the figuration.
Yes, and actually, in some ways, you could talk the same way about Poussin, kind of the opposite of. But on the other hand, there's a kind of the weird thing about Poussin is that there'll be then this relentless classicizing within a completely naturalistic, the landscapes are kind of like the hairy guy, and then all these kind of Roman-nosed people with all the same face running around and doing things, and all the same like body fat ratio and all the but I always found it kind of interesting to think about both with Poussin and actually with
you know, it's a kind of, they're not really the opposite. It's more like they make the real meaning reside, the real meaning of the painting resides in the place you didn't look first. And well, I know that's mumbo jumbo, but like in the, like, well, I'll have to talk about Poussin then. Is that you, like, I never liked Poussin my whole life, and then like something happened one day, and
What picture was it in front?
actually I will tell you I saw a drawing, and it was the birth of Priapus, and so you know, and it looks like a Poussin drawing and everything, and there's Priapus, like is like a little baby with this like log going up, and drawn in like four, you know, in this kind of weird abbreviated, like, I don't care what I'm drawing, you know, and then his mom is over there like, oh my God, totally worn out, and it was hilarious. It's a hilarious, you know, it's like a Shaggy Dog joke that has, like, you know, it's a. Anyway, I started looking for those moments. I just suddenly understood the humor of Poussin, which seemed at first to be the most humorless paintings you could ever imagine. And I became kind of obsessed, and I could suddenly understand what they're about emotionally if you don't look for emotion in like faces and all that kind of stuff. If you kind of defocus your eyes, you know, metaphorically speaking, and then see what's really happening. And I started to see what was really happening in those paintings. And I think, by the same token, there's something happening other than the sober-minded transcription of reality in Valentin, and Caravaggio is a little bit, you can't really, it's too. It's a little bit harder to talk about, but
There's Marianne. I congratulated myself for remembering that Brigitte Bardot had been Marianne in the 1960s.
it's funny how
And you can
actually, put this. It's funny how boots, how that height boot never looks good if a person's just standing there. It's weird.
I just want to. I need to get all the way back. Just give me a moment.
That was the little boy with the cage, right?
No,
You just passed.
No, it was. Actually, I may have that image farther back here.
Okay.
There we are. There we are. The little boy.
Oh, okay. And
Was there something that you wanted to?
no, it's just it's such a. I think, I mean, that brings to, I think, something to talk about with Valentin is this kind of, you know, even though everybody's drinking and having a party, just the terrible melancholy, you know, and there's no smiles anywhere.
No smiles anywhere, and for me, one of the facts that's fascinated me, the children. He paints unbelievably sympathetic children, beautiful, beautiful children. To me, one of the This is the same man who then poses as the Tiber River. You'll recognize him immediately, and he's the one falling out of the canvas. The reason I put this on was to talk about this whole idea of canvas as limit, picture exploding out, and so forth. I don't know if it's something that's of that you have anything that you'd like to comment on.
I mean, I think we you know, we're so used to seeing photographs which do that, which if, unless you try not to do that, that will happen. So we're very accustomed to seeing it, and it's you know, it had not existed before. Things were made as friezes with a certain amount of space around them.
It's difficult to me. It's one of the cases of the period eye, that this was one of the most provocative elements of his painting, that where you expected a framed picture, you instead got something that was a fragment.
Yeah, they look cut down.
Yeah.
What you see this sometimes in older paintings, but it's because it was cut down. And actually, you had Manet up. Manet will often do that, cut a figure right in half.
So let me just get back to the very beginning. Oh, there we are. Yes, this is what I wanted. I want to ask you about yourself as artist and the work and where you find yourself in the work, because this is what I believe is the first picture that we have by Valentin, and it's quite obviously, to me, a self-portrait, and I put it next to a painter painting his self-portrait, because you'll see that all you have to do is put the paintbrush in his right hand and the palette in his left, and he's actually looking in the mirror in the act of painting himself as Saint John the Baptist. And also brings up the drapery aspect,
Yeah.
which is an additive here. It
Well,
appears to me.
one thing, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring up just a technical note. In this painting, it's actually the satiny sheen on these upper forearm muscles is really extraordinary. You can't see it in reproduction at all, but it's kind of startling in the painting, and it also brought to mind one of the differences between Valentin and Caravaggio is the transition from, even though they're both chiaroscuro, extreme light, extreme dark, there's a different character in the Valentins, and I think also those have darkened. I don't think he didn't paint shadows as opaquely as Caravaggio.
Or as densely. They're not as
Yeah,
dense.
and I think there's very little white, very little lead white in the shadow, and there's a consequently there's a degradation of the shadow over time.
Absolutely.
It
becomes much more transparent.
Yeah. So I mean, that's part of the, because I was wondering, I've always wondered whether the first thing you noticed in Valentin that I always notice is there's very little of the cornea, of the white of the eye. They're often, well, now you're going to find all the ones that have whites. But generally in the parties and the drinking parties and the card playing and everything, there will be kind of these, there'll be very dark eyes, and also often very dark mouths, and I think part of that is what's happened to is the thinness of his white going transparent over a few hundred years.
The picture on the left is an early work. The picture on the right, which I think is the same person, which is, in other words, is a self-portrait, is right at the end of his career, and the first one is painted in much more densely than the latter one, and therefore the first one the latter one has much greater transparency. And this is those of you who have gone through the exhibition will doubtlessly have noticed that many of the pictures have real issues in legibility. The form isn't always easy to read.
But often they're perfect in the lights.
Yeah. And then this was a different comparison, because this is Velázquez and Valentin.
That's like 30 years later, maybe.
Yeah, it's about 15 years later. 15 years later, Velázquez's, and one of the what's puzzled me, or rather, something I've thought of. We know that Velázquez was in Rome in 1629, 1630, which is exactly the time when Valentin is working on this, and when the altarpiece is established in St. Peter's, which was created a sensation. We know that everybody was gathering around discussing them. And there are two things. I do think that Velázquez was looking very closely at Valentin, because he too was interested in working directly from the figure. And the second thing is the thinking about what happens to an allegorical figure when it's posed as just a model with the trappings.
Right. So you get a bricklayer or whatever, and he hasn't even actually bothered to turn that into a costume. It's just colored fabric draped over
right.
stuff, and then a helmet he had lying around. And
so it's called Mars in the inventories, but you look at it and you say, no way is this Mars. It's an academy, what used to be called an academy.
Or a soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, there's something I noticed, because you had Manet up too, and there's a boy drinking I think it's wine. It's a little boy like guzzling wine out of the bottle, with his back to you, going away in the
right.
darkness in
Yes.
the middle of the painting.
Yes.
I forget which one of Valentin's.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have
I
it.
may have it.
You know, Manet lifted that figure exactly and made a painting of it separately. He's in the middle in the darkness.
Yes, it's
in
one
one
of
of the-
these. There he is.
Yeah, that's
I
a
think that's what you mean.
yeah.
This one right here.
Yeah,
no?
that figure was
Yeah.
done over by, I think, unless I'm totally
Yeah,
remembering wrong,
I think
by Manet.
I think you're right. I think and this is one of the pictures that was in the royal collections in France, and then enters into the Louvre's collection. So it's a picture that Manet certainly knew. Which
And
is-
you know, we should also talk about, since I brought up Poussin, or you did, I don't know, but you know, these friezes, the ones that have these bits of I mean, I know there's a religious, there's all kinds of but I think just the literal mixing of visual styles on the, you know, with the realism, I think is ironic and ironical, or, you know, not an ironic like Chevy Chase or something, but ironic like in a
to set up a counterpoint.
yeah, well, literally, like, meant, you know, two different audiences can see two different things. You know, you're separating, you're socially separating, parceling out meanings to different audiences. I mean, that's one strict definition of, you know, like irony.
Well, you know,
It means different things to different people.
means different things, different people. In fact, my colleague who was writing the catalog had a different response from me. She felt that they were included because the patrons of many of the patrons of Valentin were also antiquarians, and so it's an antiquarian reference that makes them acceptable. I thought instead, and I think it's more on line with you, but maybe not, that they were put in as a visual contrast to what he was actually doing, and actually have an ironic rejection of one mode of paint, one mode of representation from the mode that he is taking.
Yeah, and also when you just look directly up from the Roman or Greek figure up to the kid, this, like, you know, it's an incredible, you know, actually that's an amazing thing to put in the center of a painting, that a like kid who's like totally lost the plot or something, and doesn't know what the painting he's in is about.
And since we're drawing to a close, we were talking at the beginning about space. The space in this picture is so fascinating.
Because the space of the bas relief
Yeah,
there's a lot more, there's a lot going on. There are pictures within pictures,
Yeah.
and spaces within
Yeah.
spaces.
You know, when you the figure playing the violin is, I suppose, is sitting on that chunk of architectural relief with the figures on it. His feet are on a stool. We don't see the groundwork that the stool is on. The figure sitting pouring wine is clearly not sitting on the floor, but on something else. They're all different. And
And the two knees, you know, the two,
yes, these two crossed over knees.
and then the figure in front of the bas relief is himself embedded, slightly flattened and embedded into the bas relief. He has a halo of gloom around him that embeds him in the you can't see it here, but the shadow in the real painting, the shadow of him on the bas relief is the most incredible. I mean, it looks like a shadow, but it also becomes a positive force, like a I don't know. There's something about that shadow that just, its color, it's the obvious use of just black. It's a very strange thing, that shadow. Also, by the way, in the center, a void in the center of the but yet, you know, confusion in the center at the top, and then a void at the center. You know, it's just with you know, those are weird things to put in the center of a painting.
I'm curious, John. Just finishing up on this, what has struck struck me as I've gone around Valentin, as and look at other Caravaggio paintings, is that once you start to use the figure and start to compose figure to figure, anchor your things, you lose precisely the kind of mechanism that the abstracting mechanism of Raphael, of Michelangelo, of the golden section, of grids and so forth. And you have a new kind of composition. I don't know how to describe it, whether it's open or something that has an ad hoc quality, but it creates a completely different dynamic within the picture and then between the picture and the viewer. I don't know.
Well, one thing I would want to say is that, you know, contemporary realism is generally pretty awful because there is a sense of things being acted out and it being constructed and then having people pose in that and you know the authority when this happened it was knocking down the authority of Raphael and everything. Now of course this is now the authority that in terms of painting, in terms of good painting, in terms of academic painting, is the ability to really nail fleeting appearances quickly and efficiently. But the problem is you find that, I mean, this is one reason why, say, Gerhard Richter is compelling, because he lets the photograph. He doesn't sort of. There's always a problem in constructing a realist picture that there's a kind of a icky, cloying fascist authority behind, like setting every, like very male kind of like I don't know. It's something to avoid in my. It's something that I hate when I see it in my own work, and I hate it in other people's work, and it literally looks like, you know, Arno Brecker or like, you know, it starts to look like classically constructed paintings that nevertheless have a kind of a realist moss growing over the whole thing. It's usually ends up being
So when you talk about
horrible.
fascist painting, you're thinking about literal fascist
Literally
painting,
fascist
painting under the fascist.
You know, the things that appeal, the idea of realness,
Yes.
and yet timeless authority, infusing our temporal. You know, that's in a way a definition of fascism is like substituting you substitute for what would be God and spirituality, but it would be, you know, authority, police, military, Hitler, whatever. You know, the government authorities take the place of God, and so there's a kind of a use then for the realism and the classicism in such a painting, in such a you know, or you could look at it this way. I mean, wisely, when, you know, FDR was doing these kind of semi-fascistic decorations through Washington, they used Egypt rather than Rome. There's a lot of Egyptian bird wings and stuff like that, and I think it's crucial that it be somewhat abstract. When you combine sort of balance and all those kinds of virtues with realism, something terrible can always happen, and that's why these are so miraculous, actually, and why Caravaggio and Valentin are so miraculous, is they somehow still seem random, without they still have there still seems to be the only authority is really God, rather than some bossy guy, you know, making the painting.
What you say, it seems it feeds in with one of my responses to Caravaggio and the whole Caravaggesque revolution, which is the provocation it gave, not simply as an artistic statement, but as a social statement, because it introduces a different hierarchy of values. And what you say about the combined realism with classicism, which reaffirms a hierarchy in a very malicious way, I think, and it's this creation of a introduction of a more chaotic form of composition that suggested a different social.
And I'd also
hierarchy.
add, I know we got to stop, right?
We're past our time.
But I think it's a little odd also that there's no real eroticism in this that goes along with this style. There's not many nudes except for all the men.
He never married, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think all these guys were gay. So I always found it odd that there's no erotic, that there's no conventionally heterosexual eroticism in any of the really good ones.
That's true. It's true. Listen, John, thank you so much. I hope all of you have enjoyed.